Imagine walking through a quiet American town in the middle of World War II. The streets are calm, children play in the yards, and life seems untouched by the chaos raging across the Atlantic. But just beyond the tree line, behind tall barbed wire fences and guarded watchtowers, a secret unfolds, one that most Americans would never learn about. Inside these hidden compounds, thousands of German soldiers, captured on distant battlefields, were quietly imprisoned on American soil. It's almost impossible to picture. Soldiers who had fought in the heart of Europe, who had waged war against the Allies, now laboring on farmland in the Midwest, building roads, working in factories, even playing baseball under the watchful eyes of their American captors. The very notion that enemy soldiers could exist peacefully, or at least survive, within the borders of the United States seemed unthinkable to the public. Yet it happened in dozens of camps scattered from California to the Deep South, carefully concealed from curious eyes. The conditions varied. Some camps were strict, almost prison-like, with guards patrolling day and night, watchtowers looming over cramped barracks. Others, surprisingly, allowed a degree of freedom. Prisoners could work alongside Americans, attend classes, or even perform in theatrical productions. But behind these mundane routines lurked tension, suspicion, and fear. Could these men be trusted? Were there spies among them? And what would happen if one of them tried to escape? By the end of this story, you'll see a side of World War II that few have imagined. A hidden America, quietly managing its prisoners of war, balancing morality, security, and the fragile humanity of men who were once considered enemies. The fences may have kept them in, but the secrets inside were far more powerful than any barbed wire. The journey of these German prisoners began on the battlefields of Europe, where Allied forces captured soldiers in France, Italy, and later Germany itself. For the men taken prisoner, surrender did not mean safety. It meant an uncertain voyage across the Atlantic, often through perilous waters patrolled by German U-boats. Packed tightly into ships, the POWs endured weeks of cramped quarters, seasickness, and the constant hum of tension as they crossed the ocean. For many, it was a harsh introduction to a world they had never imagined, America. Upon arrival, the prisoners were processed in coastal camps before being sent inland. Trucks and trains carried them through towns and farmland, their presence largely unnoticed by the civilian population. It is almost astonishing to think that in the midst of a nation mobilized for war, thousands of enemy soldiers were quietly transported across the country without sparking mass panic. The government, concerned about public perception and security, kept the existence of these camps as discreet as possible. Local newspapers reported little beyond the occasional notice, leaving most Americans completely unaware that their neighbors might be working side by side with captured soldiers. The camps themselves varied widely. Some were isolated military installations, guarded like fortresses with barbed wire and armed sentries. Others were surprisingly open, almost civilian in nature, where POWs could engage in work projects that supported the war effort, harvesting crops, repairing infrastructure, even working in munitions factories under strict supervision. Certain camps became notorious for their unusual practices. In some, prisoners were allowed to take classes, attend lectures, and participate in recreational activities. In others, the strict routines of camp life created friction and minor rebellions, revealing the delicate balance between control and humane treatment. Despite the efforts to maintain secrecy, whispers began to spread. Curious townsfolk noticed strange uniforms and German accents, and rumors about life behind the fences fueled speculation and suspicion. Yet the contrast between the chaos of the European warfront and the structured, almost peaceful life in these American camps created a tension that no one could ignore. Here on American soil, enemy soldiers were contained, but never entirely predictable. Their presence a constant reminder of a distant war that had somehow arrived quietly in their midst. By understanding how these POWs made it from Europe to America, we begin to see not just the logistics of war, but the human stories hidden behind each barbed wire fence, stories of fear, adaptation, and the strange coexistence of enemy and host in a land far from the battlefield. Inside the barbed wire perimeters of America's hidden POW camps, life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Each day began before dawn, with guards patrolling the watchtowers and prisoners lining up for roll call. The routines were strict, designed to instill order, yet beneath the surface there was a surprising complexity to life behind the fences. Work assignments varied. Some men labored in fields, harvesting crops to support the American war effort, while others repaired roads, maintained machinery, or even assisted in local factories. The labor was grueling, but it also offered purpose, and in some ways a strange sense of normalcy amid the uncertainty. Recreation became a lifeline. Soccer matches, theatrical performances, and card games allowed prisoners to reclaim pieces of their humanity. Some camps even offered classes in English, mechanics, and other skills, providing a glimpse of life beyond the wire. These moments of normalcy, however, existed alongside tension and suspicion. Guards kept a watchful eye, always wary of escape attempts or acts of sabotage. And the prisoners themselves, caught between obedience and defiance, constantly tested the boundaries. Stories of ingenuity and risk peppered life in the camps. In one notorious case, a small group of prisoners dug a tunnel beneath their barracks, hoping to vanish under the cover of night. The tunnel stretched for weeks, and the anticipation in the camp grew as guards remained oblivious until a routine inspection revealed the carefully concealed entrance. In another camp, a German soldier formed an unlikely friendship with an American farmer, working side by side in the fields and exchanging stories of home. The bond was fragile, built on cautious trust, yet it became a rare human connection in a world defined by captivity. Conflict also simmered within the camps. Disagreements over work assignments, differences in rank among prisoners, and the pressure of confinement occasionally erupted into rebellion. In some cases, groups refused to work or challenged the authority of the guards, forcing camp commanders to tread a delicate line between discipline and humane treatment. Each rebellion, though minor, heightened the underlying tension and reminded everyone that even behind fences, control was never absolute. The life of a POW in America was paradoxical, harsh yet structured, dangerous yet oddly secure, lonely yet punctuated with fleeting moments of connection. These men, once enemies on the battlefield, navigated a strange existence where survival depended as much on adaptation and diplomacy as it did on obedience. Every interaction, every work detail, every fleeting friendship revealed a human story that went far beyond uniforms and fences, a story of resilience, cunning, and the fragile threads of trust in a world designed to contain them. Beneath the fences and watchtowers of America's POW camps, a quiet moral struggle unfolded, one that few on the outside ever considered. How should a nation treat men who had fought against them, men responsible for unimaginable destruction in Europe? The government's official stance was clear. Prisoners of war were to be treated humanely in accordance with the Geneva Conventions. Yet this policy clashed with public sentiment. Many Americans, still grieving lost sons and friends, could barely stomach the idea of enemy soldiers living in comfort while they toiled on farms or in factories. The use of POW labor became a lightning rod for controversy. German soldiers worked side by side with Americans in agriculture, repairing railroads and maintaining factories that supported the war effort. Some locals saw this as an affront, questioning why men who had once sought to destroy their country were now being fed, clothed, and paid, albeit modestly, for their labor. Rumors and resentment spread, and tensions flared when families discovered that the enemy was sometimes more productive, disciplined, or skilled than local workers. Yet within these tensions, moments of surprising humanity emerged. In one camp in Texas, a POW secretly cared for a sick American child, using knowledge from his medical training to save her life. In another, a group of prisoners painted murals for local schools, leaving behind scenes of peace and cooperation that would endure long after the war. These acts of kindness stood in stark contrast to darker stories: guards who abused prisoners, strict punishments for minor infractions, and instances where fear of sabotage led to harsh restrictions and humiliating inspections. The camps became a mirror reflecting the nation's own struggle with morality, justice, and revenge. Americans had to wrestle with a paradox: upholding ethical treatment while guarding against potential threats. For prisoners, the dilemma was equally stark. Should they obey their captors, biding their time, or risk defiance to reclaim a sense of dignity? Every act, every decision carried consequences that rippled through the tense, tightly controlled environment of the camp. This moral complexity heightened the suspense, creating an invisible drama beyond the fences. Each day was a balancing act, a test of conscience for both captor and captive. And as the war raged thousands of miles away, these camps became more than mere containment facilities. They were crucibles of ethical choice, where the definitions of right and wrong blurred, and where the smallest act of kindness or cruelty could leave an indelible mark. Beneath the calm surface of America's hidden POW camps, a darker world simmered, one that few outside the fences ever imagined. While most prisoners settled into routines of work, recreation, and cautious cooperation, a shadow of suspicion and intrigue loomed over every camp. The fences did more than contain bodies. They contained secrets, whispers of espionage, sabotage, and even mysterious deaths that fueled fear on both sides. Some prisoners sought more than survival, they sought advantage. In one camp in New Mexico, a small faction of prisoners attempted to forge communications with German intelligence. Using painstakingly hidden codes and stolen office supplies, they transmitted messages to the outside world, hoping to coordinate information or even sabotage production facilities. The attempts were rarely successful, but the discovery of such plots caused a storm among American officers. Investigations revealed that a single misplaced letter, a small leak of technical information, could have endangered thousands of soldiers fighting overseas. Guards patrolled with renewed vigilance. Inspections became more frequent, and the prisoners' every move was scrutinized. Escapes, though rare, became legendary within the camps. In one instance, a German soldier crafted a makeshift rope from bedsheets, descending from a watchtower under the cover of darkness. He ran across open fields for miles, only to be recaptured by alert local farmers who had been briefed on potential escape attempts. In another case, a prisoner managed to blend into a group of American laborers transporting goods to a nearby town, walking unnoticed for several hours before being recognized. These stories spread quickly among prisoners, fueling a mixture of awe, hope, and tension. Every rumor of escape heightened anxiety, keeping guards and prisoners alike on edge. Yet the most unsettling events were the unexplained ones. In camps scattered across the Midwest and South, several deaths occurred under mysterious circumstances. Some men were found in their bunks, seemingly lifeless, with no signs of struggle. Others suffered from sudden illnesses, sparking speculation of poisoning or foul play. Investigations were conducted quietly, and official reports often cited natural causes or accidental misadventure. But whispers persisted among prisoners and guards alike. The fear that something darker was at work, an internal network of revenge, betrayal, or even covert assassinations, haunted the camps. Government cover-ups only added to the tension. Authorities, anxious to maintain morale and prevent public panic, withheld details from the press and local communities. Families living near the camps were often told that the prisoners were merely laborers, their identities and nationalities downplayed or disguised. In some cases, rumors circulated that entire incidents, from escape attempts to suspicious deaths, were erased from official records. This secrecy created a dual reality, one for the prisoners, another for the unsuspecting Americans outside the fences. The sense that something vital was being hidden created an invisible pressure, a feeling that at any moment the fragile order could collapse. Amidst this tension, the prisoners themselves were not passive. Some engaged in subtle manipulations, cultivating relationships with sympathetic guards or civilians to gain small advantages. A POW might smuggle letters, barter for extra food, or arrange a brief unsupervised excursion to the edge of camp. These acts, though seemingly minor, fed an undercurrent of unease. Guards could never fully relax, and the prisoners' ingenuity became a constant reminder that control was never absolute. This chapter of the camp's history reveals a world of contradictions. Life behind fences could be routine and humane, yet it was always shadowed by intrigue and danger. Every day, the delicate balance between order and chaos, between trust and betrayal, hung by a thread. And while many of these stories remained hidden for decades, their impact on the prisoners, the guards, and the communities surrounding the camps was profound. By examining the secrets and scandals of America's POW camps, we glimpse a reality that challenges our assumptions about the war. These were not merely safe-holding facilities. They were arenas of strategy, morality, and survival. The prisoners were more than captives. They were humans navigating a labyrinth of fear, opportunity, and uncertainty. And the Americans tasked with controlling them were constantly balancing duty, conscience, and the very real possibility that one small mistake could have catastrophic consequences. As the war edged closer to its end, the tension in the camps did not simply vanish. The stories of espionage, escape, and mysterious deaths lingered, echoing long after the prisoners were gone. They serve as a reminder that even in the safety of American soil, war's shadows extended far beyond the battlefield, weaving a complex tapestry of fear, cunning, and secrecy that few Americans would ever fully understand. As 1945 drew to a close and the guns of Europe fell silent, the world began to reckon with the aftermath of war. For the German prisoners of war held in America, peace did not immediately mean freedom. Months or even years passed before the complex process of repatriation began. Ships returned across the Atlantic, carrying men who had spent the bulk of the war on foreign soil, far from home, family, and everything familiar. For some, it was a relief. For others, a bittersweet farewell to a strange but oddly formative chapter of their lives. The departure from the camps was never easy. Farewells were quiet yet profoundly emotional. Prisoners who had once been enemies shared handshakes, embraces, and whispered words of gratitude with guards and local families who had become part of their daily lives. Friendships had formed across lines once thought unbridgeable. A POW who worked alongside an American farmer, a young soldier who helped tend to a child, or the friendships born on the soccer field, where competition gave way to mutual respect. For many, these connections were the most humanizing part of captivity, a stark contrast to the dehumanizing experiences of the battlefield. Yet, the psychological impact of captivity lingered long after the ships left port. For the prisoners, returning to Germany was a jarring confrontation with a country devastated by war. Cities lay in ruins, families were fractured, and the shadow of defeat loomed large. Memories of the camps, both their harsh routines and their rare moments of kindness, remained vivid. Some POWs wrote letters to the Americans who had shown them compassion, recounting stories of survival, hope, and the delicate bonds that had kept them sane. Others carried guilt, shame, or anger, haunted by the choices they had been forced to make under confinement. American guards and civilians were not immune to the experience. The presence of thousands of enemy soldiers on home soil had challenged their notions of morality, trust, and justice. Many recalled the prisoners who had displayed unexpected kindness, skill, or resilience. Stories that blurred the lines between enemy and human being. For some, lifelong friendships emerged, while for others, the memory of fear and suspicion lingered, a quiet reminder of the tension that had existed just beyond the fences. The post-war stories were as varied as the camps themselves. In Kansas, a former POW returned years later to visit the farm, where he had worked alongside an American family, reconnecting with those who had treated him as more than a captive. In Georgia, a former prisoner wrote a memoir describing the secret lessons he had learned about trust, courage, and the capacity for human kindness in the most unlikely circumstances. These narratives revealed that the POW camps had become more than detention centers. They were crucibles where morality, resilience, and understanding were tested and forged. Even decades later, the impact could be felt. Communities that had once hosted the camps remembered them with a mix of pride and unease. The fences were gone, the watchtowers dismantled, but the stories endured, of men who had survived not only as soldiers, but as people navigating fear, friendship, and the fragile humanity that persisted even in captivity. The hidden chapter of America's POW camps had quietly shaped lives on both sides of the Atlantic, leaving legacies of reflection, reconciliation, and remembrance. As these prisoners stepped back onto German soil, they carried with them a paradoxical truth. They had been captives, yet in many ways freer than they could have imagined, free to learn, to survive, and to form bonds that defied the very war that had brought them to America. And for the Americans who watched them go, the lessons endured as well, that even in a world torn apart by conflict, understanding and empathy could coexist with duty and vigilance, leaving a lasting mark on history. The war may have ended, but the echoes of these hidden camps continued to resonate, shaping memories, relationships, and the very perception of what it meant to be human in times of extraordinary strife. For decades, the story of America's POW camps remained largely invisible, tucked behind fences and watchtowers, hidden not just from the public, but from the broader narrative of World War II. These camps were concealed for a reason. A nation at war did not want to reveal that enemy soldiers walked its soil, worked its fields, and sometimes formed unexpected bonds with its citizens. The secrecy allowed Americans to maintain a sense of security, while the government balanced the delicate moral and practical challenges of housing thousands of captured soldiers. Yet behind the secrecy lay a remarkable story about humanity. Within those fences, acts of kindness coexisted with fear, ingenuity met strict control, and friendships blossomed in the unlikeliest of places. The camps revealed that even in times of conflict, empathy and morality could survive, and that the lines between enemy and neighbor were far more complex than anyone had imagined. Americans and prisoners alike were forced to navigate not just survival, but the ethical and emotional weight of coexistence in extraordinary circumstances. These hidden chapters challenge our assumptions about war and captivity. They remind us that history is rarely simple, that human experience cannot be confined to clear-cut heroes and villains. The men who once fought bitterly against each other discovered, in the quiet and secrecy of these camps, that humanity could endure even in confinement. As we look back now, the question lingers: what other truths about war remain hidden, and how might they reshape our understanding of courage, empathy, and the fragile bonds that connect us, even in the darkest of times? The story of America's POW camps is more than a historical footnote. It is a testament to the complexity of human nature, a secret world that continues to echo across generations.